Now let's look at the last story, right? I want to share is about American Airlines. And here I want to show you the framework to define and prioritize problems. I'm going to compare, right, what we teach or produce now versus what is counterintuitive. So what do we teach? We teach problem-solving skills, right? And what do we produce? We produce technically competent students. Right? Unfortunately, these students will be replaced by AI. Right? Because they're competing directly with AI. Right? Not only that, right? These students do not see the big picture. Right? Just like the blind man with the elephant. I know many of you will not agree with me. I am completely okay with that. Right? However, I truly feel that we are teaching our students mostly the technical details. Right? Without a big picture. So what's counterintuitive? What should we teach and produce? Right? We think we should focus more. Right? We should not forget about problem-solving skills. What we should do is, on the top of the technical details, we should give students, right, framing and judgment. We should give them this kind of skills. Right? For example, right, here are all the problems of the company. Right? The question is, what's the real problem to solve? How do we set priorities? But that's the kind of training we should give to our students. So we can produce visionary leaders, right, who are compatible to AI, who can work with AI. So this can be best illustrated by example. So I'm going to look at American Airlines in the air industry in recent years. Right, let's look at their stock price first. Right, I plot the stock price changes over time. Right, for American Airlines, for Delta, United, and so on, and together with the S&P 500 index. And you can see United in this 4-year period. Right, United stock prices increased by 161%. S&P 500 71%. And where is American Airlines? It's right here. It actually decreased by 14%. Just by looking at this graph, you will see American Airlines is in trouble, right, in comparison to its peers. The question is, what are the problems and how to set priority? Here is the competitive intelligence framework, right, we used, right, to discover and prioritize problems. It has 3 steps. We will start with industry analysis to assess, right, our industry's potential and risk. Using techniques such as competition intensity, right, how intensified competition is, industry trend, are we sunrising or sunsetting, right, and value chain analysis, right, what's the most valuable segment in my supply chain. And the second step is called competition positioning. Right, we're going to position our target company, right, in a competitive landscape to see where it stands, right, using techniques such as profit comparison, enterprise ranking, and KPI examination. Right, which is think about KPI examination as the physical examination of a company. And the last step is enterprise diagnosis, right, to discover and prioritize problems. Right, utilizing techniques such as strength and weakness, right, breakdown analysis, and value driver analysis. So using this framework, right, we can answer the following questions. Right, for example, what are the market potential, right, risk, and trend? What are the most valuable segments in my supply chain? So I might move towards. And where do I stand, right, in a competitive landscape in comparison to my peers, and what are my strengths and weaknesses? And most importantly, right, which factors may drive a company's financial performance in my industry? And finally, what are my key problems and which one to solve first? Here I want to show you the most exciting moments of this story. First of all, how tough is this industry? Just one graph, you will see that. So I'm plotting all the airlines, right, on this graph, with x-axis being the total revenue, meaning size, and y-axis is the profitability, which is net margin. And you can see this is the big three, right? The top three airlines enjoys: American Airlines, United Airlines, and Delta. All of them are profitable, although American Airlines is just barely profitable. And here are the medium players, right? These Southwest, right? Alaska Airlines, and I think JetBlue, right? And they have much smaller, right, margins than the big three. And even of that, JetBlue was losing significantly, so they're barely afloat. And the smaller airlines are here; they are largely lost. Right? And if you look at this, more than 50% of these airlines are losing money, and they can lose pretty significantly, more than 40%. Okay, so the conclusion is, right, this industry is tough, especially for smaller players. And this graph will also show you, right, the revenue breakdown will also show you exactly how tough it is. Now let's look at the industry average, which is on your left. Right, it shows that cost of goods sold accounts for nearly 80% of the revenue, right, and net margin is about 3% for the industry on average. So this is a pretty tough industry, right? For $100 sales, 80% went to cost of goods sold. They only make, right, $3 on average. Now let's compare the big three, right? American Airlines, Delta, and United. We can see that American Airlines cost of goods sold is greater than the industry average, right? It's less efficient, right? And its net income is only 0.2%, right? It's much smaller than the industry average, right? But Delta and United both have smaller, right, cost of goods sold than the industry average, and much higher, right, net income. Now, because cost of goods sold is the biggest portion of the revenue, so let's focus on cost of goods sold. Let's break down goods sold further to see its major component. Here is the breakdown of cost of goods sold for these airlines. And we find many common cost components, right? Such as, let me see here, such as the staff cost, which is the biggest portion, right? Rent and netting cost, right? Fuel cost, and operation, maintenance, and repair cost. Just by looking at these percentages, right, we find that American Airlines has the highest rental and netting fee, and also operating and maintenance cost. Remember, because American Airlines has the biggest cost of goods sold as a whole, right? Now, however, we're not sure about staff cost and the fuel cost. So what we do is we combine the revenue breakdown percentage with the cost of goods sold breakdown percentage to get the percentage for each individual cost component of cost of goods sold. And here it is. We find that, right, American Airlines is here in blue, right? It has the highest, right, cost components for all categories, from staff cost, right, to fuel cost, to rental and netting, and to operation, maintenance, and repair. And Delta is the best in all categories, and United is in between. Right? And here, let's just imagine if American Airlines can match up, right, can improve its cost efficiency, right, and match up United. Its net margin, if you calculate the difference between American Airlines and United, you'll find out if American Airlines matched up with United, its net margin would be 5.0% rather than 0.2%. Just put this into perspective. 1% of revenue, of American Airlines revenue, is $600 million. Imagine its stock price. All right. Now, if you're the CEO or if you are the people in charge, in this company, looking at this graph, right, this breakdown of cost structures, right, and in comparison with your peers, which one should be prioritized? Well, let's look at one with the highest financial stake, right? Staff cost, the difference is 2.3%. Fuel is about almost the same as United Airlines, but rental and landing fee is about 1.7% difference. And OMR, operation, maintenance, and repair, is about 1.4%. So it turns out staff cost should have the priority because it makes the biggest financial difference. Now, the staff cost should be prioritized also because of the labor productivity issue, right? If you draw the labor productivity line over time for all these three companies, you'll find out that although American Airlines spent the highest cost on staff, it had the lowest labor productivity. Right, that's the revenue divided by number of employees, and the difference is actually very big. Right, per employee, American Airlines generates about $400,000 in revenue, and Delta about more than $600,000 per employee. Right, this example shows how to break down step by step a complex situation to isolate the operational issues with the greatest financial stakes. So let me wrap up by students' testimonials. First comment says that financial impact of supply chain, which is the supply chain butterfly effect, provides an excellent understanding of how operational performance affects a company's market value. And here a student says, I find sourcing analytics module most useful, because it shows how to narrow down choosing a supplier, which would relate to what I want to do in my future job. So another student says, I find sourcing and inventory analytics, which I didn't cover here, to be most useful because I deal with these aspects the most at the job I'm currently working at. And here's another student's feedback. Says the competitive intelligence session, which is problem definition and prioritization, was another favorite because it showed how to analyze companies and spot problems like a consultant would. Now, these results, although the outcome were achieved by visual storytelling, I didn't give any math equations here. Instead, I just gave the pictures and tell stories behind the picture. Because visual storytelling is a powerful teaching tool. It's also a powerful skills for people in real life. Because they can tell the story hidden behind the data. And it can forge parts into a whole picture. All right, any questions, please? Again, all the materials covered today come from this book, here. If you're an instructor, I would be happy to share it with you. If you're not, and you are interested in this material, you can check out my Coursera specialization.